The United States was not prepared for World War II, and so it took more than 6 months before the first American soldiers faced the German army in combat. It was the August 1942 amphibious raid on the French port of Dieppe, and with 6,000 British and Canadian troops were 50 American soldiers. They were U.S. Rangers from the newly formed battalion of shock troops. The raid on Dieppe was a disaster, but that first Ranger defeat was followed by a long string of successes in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, and the Philippines. Join us now as the History Channel presents Army Rangers.
These are America's elite shock troops, the United States Army 75th Ranger Regiment. A select unit trained to stagger an adversary with lethal speed and firepower. Executed across land, sea, or from the air, theirs is a complex operation that is brutally clear-cut in its objective.
Simply, the mission of the U.S. Army Ranger is to kill, destruct, and eliminate threats, potential targets.
But to operate deep in hostile territory, the Rangers must put themselves in constant peril.
The dangers that we face will basically be the fact that we're going behind enemy lines. Usually we go into their backyards most of the time.
One mistake, and a Ranger unit can wind up outmanned, outgunned, and far from help. It is a threat that has claimed Ranger lives as recently as 1993 in an ambush in the war-torn alleys of Somalia.
People are surrounding you 360 degrees. You're in their backyard. They've grown up there. They know the terrain. They know every back alley cut through.
There's people screaming, people getting shot, and it's real world. But reality isn't really a good word for it because it is so unreal.
In this night exercise, a platoon of 35 Rangers is inserted by helicopter into an urban combat zone bristling with concealed enemy threats. In surgically seizing their objective, these Rangers are aided by the latest night vision devices and ever-evolving strike tactics. They are also guided by a long and illustrious Ranger tradition, forged in some of the most dangerous campaigns ever faced by American fighting men.
The legacy of the Rangers is that we're the first ones in, and we're expected to win anywhere in the world. And we'll never let our predecessors down by failing them.
On your feet!
Theirs is a proud lineage, tracing back to the French and Indian War and the informal long-ranging units of Robert Rogers. Rogers' Rangers' devastating quick strike tactics would inspire informal Ranger units up through the Civil War. Almost 200 years later, the modern Ranger was reborn in the outbreak of World War II. By early 1942, with Allied forces desperate to gain a foothold against the Axis war machine, U.S. commanders searched for ways to strike back. Taking a cue from the legendary British commandos, General Lucian Truscott urged the formation of an American commando unit. 3,000 intrepid volunteers were soon found among the U.S. troops stationed in Britain. In the hands of British commandos, the volunteers were pared down to an elite corps of 500. The new unit was activated as the 1st Ranger Battalion on June 19, 1942. At Achnacarry, Scotland, the commando trainers subjected the newly minted Rangers to brutal training across mountain cliffs, minefields, and freezing streams. 3 men died in the process, but the new battalion endured the fierce indoctrination. To simulate the stress of combat, live rounds were fired past the Ranger trainees.
One of the reasons that the Rangers were a hush-hush outfit at the beginning, because at that time, the mothers at home would have really raised Cain if they knew their boys were being trained under live fire. And if you could live through it, you could fight through it.
Leading the Rangers through the training was their hand-picked battalion commander, a charismatic major named William O. Darby. In August 1942, the Rangers got their baptism of fire. sending a small force with the commandos on a risky raid on the French town of Dieppe. 6 men were lost, but the Rangers had passed their first test. In the Allied move on North Africa in November 1942, Darby's battle-proven Rangers were the spearheaders of the invasion, landing ahead of the main force at Arzew, Algeria. The landings were lightly opposed, but the Rangers' first deep penetration raid on a power station would show the men a level of warfare beyond any training. The battle with the defending Germans was Warren Evans' first taste of face-to-face combat.
This man came charging at me, my enemy, bent on killing me. But as I looked at him, I looked into his eyes, and they were big and frightened and so forth, and I froze on the trigger. I couldn't pull it.
A burst of fire from a fellow Ranger killed the German attacker within feet of Evans.
I have nightmares. I still do to this day. That's one of them. I look into that man's eyes. You'd be surprised how many times I've looked into his eyes since.
Within months, Darby's Rangers had been reinforced with the addition of the 3rd and 4th Ranger Battalions. With a combined strength of 1,400 men, Darby's battalions led the way again when Allied forces hit the beaches in the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Ironically, the rough weather that tossed the Ranger assault craft during the night attack proved to be a lifesaver as the Rangers dodged Axis searchlights. Once on shore in Sicily, Ranger units continued to lead the way, repeatedly piercing German and Italian lines to punch holes for the Allied drive to Messina. By the time Colonel Darby's troops prepared to lead their 3rd landing at Salerno on the Italian mainland, hardened Ranger veterans had seen more close-hand combat than any other American soldier. Each 35-man Ranger platoon was divided into 3 squads. 2 rifle squads were armed with M1 Garands, Tommy guns, and the 20-pound Browning automatic rifle. Behind them followed the mortars and bazookas that were the Rangers' deadly answer to Nazi bunkers and machine gun nests. In a long winter of bitter fighting through the mountains of Italy, the 3 Ranger battalions conducted countless patrols and raids into Axis lines. By late 1943, the Allies' slow progress against fierce Nazi resistance led to a bold plan. Darby's Rangers would lead a night landing by the U.S. 5th Army on the Italian port of Anzio, behind the German lines. The following day, Ranger units were successful in helping secure a broad beachhead for the main landing force. Even as the landing continued, Ranger scouts began detecting what some suspected to be a huge German armored force, massing just inland from the beaches. Unaware of the reports, High Command ordered Colonel Darby to send 2 of his battalions inland to seize the town of Cisterna della Toria to break the German supply line. As a company commander, Captain Warren Evans realized he could be leading his men into a death trap.
As they briefed us, I knew that they were wrong because I had had patrols there, and I knew that they had brought up a lot of armor. I knew they had a lot of troops in that area. At that time, Colonel Darby, very West Point and very proper, said, those are my orders, those are your orders.
You're watching Army Rangers here on the History Channel. You're watching Army Rangers here on the History Channel.
Under the cover of darkness on January 30th, 1944, a column of Rangers edged cautiously up a canal from the Anzio beachhead toward the Italian town of Cisterna. As they crept, many veteran Rangers feared that their long streak of luck had run out.
This was the time we were going to take our whipping. You knew it had to come sometime. I didn't expect that I would ever get home.
The Rangers began taking German fire as they drew close and began fighting their way into the town. As dawn broke, the battered men got their first glimpse of the fate that awaited them. Massing for a counterattack, 36 enemy battalions backed by tanks and armor had turned Cisterna into a fortress.
And we were surrounded by probably numbers as much as 100 to 1.
Thousands of heavily armed German troops quickly encircled the small Ranger force. Nazi tanks turned the canal into a murderous shooting gallery. Warren Evans' company was near the rear of the column and could have retreated, but abandoning fellow Rangers was an unthinkable option.
I probably would have been a psychiatric case in a veterans hospital. If I'd gotten my company back and we were relatively unscathed and they were wiped out.
The desperate radio calls followed by silence signaled to Colonel William Darby that he had sent his men on a suicide mission. Of 767 Rangers sent to fight in Cisterna, only 6 would escape death or capture to make it back to Allied lines. But in their death throes, the ambush Rangers would inflict a staggering 5,000 casualties on the massive German force. Taken prisoner, Warren Evans would survive 2 failed escape attempts before successfully fleeing his captors to reach Allied lines after 16 months in captivity. Darby's Rangers had been exterminated, never to fight again. Yet in this darkest of hours, the tradition shaped by their courage would endure. For in 1943, as Darby's Rangers were cutting their teeth in combat, a separate Ranger unit was forged in their image. The newly formed 2nd Battalion sought out volunteers able to meet the same rigorous Ranger standards.
In the field, we had to do everything that we were told to do, and some of those things seem to be impossible, but there are men who will do them, and there are men who won't do them. And the ones that won't, they're gone the next day.
We were considered part of an elite group, and I think that instilled a little ego in part of every man.
The 500 men of the 2nd Battalion were led by Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder, a former Texas football coach who expected his Rangers to perform like a well-drilled team.
He was the best leader I ever saw in life, or in the Army. And it was him that was able to pull us together with his leadership.
Even Rudder could not know the classified target for their upcoming mission. But the specialized training left little doubt about the terrain on which the new Rangers would fight.
We had to climb cliffs as high as 200 or 300 feet straight up, no safety rope. The mere thought of that to some men, they didn't want to go any further. They were ready to leave right away.
In the all-out Allied invasion of occupied France on D-Day, June 6, 1944, 60,000 American troops would be sent to fight their way ashore to kick down the door of Hitler's mammoth Atlantic Wall. Once again, Rangers would lead the way. The men of the 2nd Ranger Battalion were ordered to knock out the lethal gun batteries and emplacements that threatened to annihilate the invaders before they reached the beaches. The 6 companies of the battalion would split up to assault 3 different positions. A and B Company would join with the 5th Ranger Battalion to lead the assault on Omaha Beach. C Company would be sent alone to destroy a cliff-top fortress at Point de la Percée. But it was D, E, and F companies that would draw what General Omar Bradley called the deadliest mission of D-Day. Wipe out the 6-inch guns that sat atop Point du Hoc, which could rain high explosive shells up to 12 miles down the beaches or straight out to sea.
It meant the saving of thousands of lives on the landing beaches to get those guns out of action before they could